I'll see you guys in the dark.
So this happened to me a few years ago when I was 15. My family and I lived in Las Vegas and were going on what my parents called a staycation. Basically just a vacation without leaving town. We had been staying at the Circus Hotel, which is connected to this indoor amusement park called the Adventure Dome. Now that context is out of the way. While we were there, I became motion sick, so I went up to the hotel room to lay down until I felt better, as well as taking some Pepto-Bismol. I stayed there for around half an hour, just for safe measure. Usually I would carry my phone with me so that if I encountered any awkward situations, I could simply pull out my phone and pretend to be on a call. This time, however, I left it in the hotel room along with anything else that may potentially fall out on a ride. Once I left the room, I quickly checked the hallway to see if anyone was in it, and there was a man sitting outside one of the doors, seemingly on a call. This also happened to be the direction of the elevator. As I began walking towards the elevator, he noticed me, got up, and began walking towards me. He started asking me things like, "Hey, are you from around here?" And, "Who are you with?" Now I'm extremely awkward with people, and always have been, so I kept attempting to end the conversation and get him to go away with simple one-word phrases, which he completely ignored. Then he asked me if I'd like to go have some fun with him in his room. I was 15, and I looked at possibly even younger, which was what made it a bit unnerving in the first place since he looked to be around his 40s. I said that I was in a rush to meet up with my family for lunch and needed to hurry, so no. Yet the rest of the way to the elevator, and while waiting for it, he kept trying to convince me to go with him. Luckily, he at least let me be when the elevator arrived and I got on. Thank goodness there were other people on it, or this may have ended a bit differently. Long story short, none of us were allowed by ourselves for the remainder of the trip. I told my parents once I got downstairs, and my father was pissed as well as my mom. The rest of the trip went well, and we didn't see him again. But still, if you were young or have no defense, be careful when walking alone. I don't know if this was actually creepy, or if it was just the anxiety talking, nor what his intentions were, but either way, it was creepy as all hell to me at the time. My fiancé, Will, and I stayed in uptown New York a couple of weeks ago for a mini getaway. The hotel was pretty dingy, but the price was right, and they had smoking rooms. One night we had gotten back from dinner, about 11 p.m., when Will decided he wanted a soda. The hotel didn't have any elevators, so we started the trek to the lower level vending machines. Once we got to the first floor, we started walking down this long hallway when I see an open hotel room door. While passing, I glance inside and see an older woman standing in the middle of the dark room, pulling at her hair with her fists, with a huge smile on her face. I instantly start having a mini panic attack. I look to Will, and he obviously hadn't seen this deranged woman. Will says, "I think we're walking the wrong way. Let's turn around." We turn around and walk back to her room, but I don't look inside. We keep walking down this insanely long hallway, and when we're far enough down, I whisper, "Baby, there's something going on in one of those rooms. Something's not right." He stopped walking to ask me about it when we see a sign for the vending machines, and they're back by that freaking room. We turn to walk back and down the hallway when we see an arm sticking out of the woman's room and waving around slowly. Not waving hello exactly, just very slowly wobbling back and forth. Then her door slams shut and we hear all the locks click. I start freaking out more and saying I don't want to go back there. But Will says the room is next to the lobby and an attendant is there, so if anything happens we can just run to the desk. We walk back by the room and make it to the vending machines, then a little closet-type room right off to the lobby. I start putting change in the machine, and of course I only have nickels and dimes, so it's taking me forever. All of a sudden, I get that feeling that someone is staring at me. I turn to the doorway, and the woman is standing there with this huge smile on her face, just staring at us. What really creeped me out is that we had to walk through 3 heavy doors to get to this room, which means she had silently snuck through. Will and I just froze and stare straight ahead, pretending like we don't see her. I've stopped putting change in the machine at this point and just look like a statue. Then she starts giggling, a high-pitched little girl giggle. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her put her hands over her mouth like a schoolgirl. I start silently crying. I'm frozen to the spot just listening to this cold, crazy lady giggling like a 5-year-old while staring at me. Then she just turned around and walked away. Will grabs the soda, and we book it out of there. We ran all the way back down the long hallway, up 4 flights of stairs, and into our room, while looking over our shoulders the entire time. I propped a chair under the door and couldn't sleep the entire night. I didn't see the woman the next morning. So, deranged woman in the New York hotel room, please, let's never meet again. This story takes place 3 months ago at a karaoke bar. My boyfriend's older sister, Angie, and I went out for the first time together. And we went to this little bar that hosts a karaoke night every Friday night. She had a guy friend, Paul, who met us there, who had a crush on her, and he bought us drinks the whole night. We were having a good night. It was like 2 a.m., and we were sitting outside because both Paul and Angie smoke, but I don't. But because I didn't want to stay in there alone or anything, I went with her. We found a wooden table with bench-like seats. The 2 of them sat on one side of the table, and I was on the other side by myself, talking with them. Some random guy was behind me, standing like 3 feet away, leaning on the wall, just like he was close enough that I could see him if I moved my eye to the left a bit. Angie is very outgoing, and so as we were talking, she ended up asking him some questions. I can't remember what she asked, because I wasn't paying attention to them, but rather the people who were talking around us. But he ended up responding, and slowly was approaching my side of the table. Once he got to my side, he sat down beside me, at which I already started to get a weird vibe from him. I was talking to Angie about something when I stopped. Pete started asking where I was from, since it was clear I'm not from England, since I have no British accent. I told him I'm from Canada, and he told me he works for immigration at the airport, to which I said, "Oh, that's nice," not showing much interest. He just asked what I could possibly be doing here, and I replied by telling him that I was here visiting my boyfriend. Angie was talking about how she was here with her boyfriend's girlfriend to other people, and she was having conversations with. Pete had both his arms resting on the table, one of his hands holding his glass of whatever he was drinking that night, and then he moved the hand that was closest to me and put it on his lap. But being that I'm a very observant person, I noticed this, and was starting to already feel uncomfortable. As Angie and Paul were talking about stuff from the other people who were outside, because my hand was resting on my lap, he moved over on the bench to be closer to me, and reached for my hand and held it, really firm and hard. I quickly pulled it away, and moved myself over a bit on the wooden bench, and put my hand that he just held on the table, and held onto my drink. He put it back in his lap, and with a few minutes later, he was reaching under the table again. But this time, he grabbed my knee and held it. I pushed the hand away again, and repeated, "I have a boyfriend," to him, and even Angie was like, "Dude, she has a boyfriend, in case you didn't hear the first, 3 times she said it." So we carry on outside for the next hour, and then when it gets to 3 a.m. when the bar closes, Angie and I were going to go back home, but she decided she wanted to hang out at Paul's house for a bit and drink more there and stuff. So I agreed, but all of a sudden, Pete asked, "Oh, well, can I come with you? I'm only here for tonight, and I go back to where I live tomorrow." And Angie said, I mean, it's not my how, but if my friend is fine with you, it's sure. So Paul allowed him to come along to his place with us. Angie called an Uber to get us to Paul's house. While we waited at the table for the Uber, Pete said, "We can go back to my hotel room and wait for an Uber. I'm staying right here." So Angie, of course, agreed, but I didn't like that idea so much because he kept saying how pretty we look, etc. the entire time we were going to his hotel. And plus, I didn't know how to get home myself since I had no idea even where I was, so I just followed them. We get in the room and we wait 10 minutes for the Uber. The whole time Pete is full on staring at us, smirking and stuff, for God knows whatever the reason was. We got to her friend's house. Pete is flirting with me and even rubbed my leg again when I was sitting on the floor because I wasn't feeling too good. Skip to when we all leave. Pete tells us he was going to book an Uber for himself, so naturally Angie and I booked separate Uber to get home. But I ended up glancing down at his phone when he was booking the Uber, and he never actually booked a ride. He was just chilling on the app, acting like he was. I thought this was weird. So 15 minutes later, our Uber is outside. Pete was like, "Hey, can I just hop in there with you two?" And Angie replied kind of hesitantly like, okay. But I thought your Uber was on its way though. And he was like, "I don't know," but with the weirdest tone in his voice. So he has a smoke outside the car before getting in. Her and I are in the car with the driver, and that's when I tell her that he never really booked a ride for himself. We both looked at one another for a few seconds in confusion, and you could tell that now she was seeming to be a bit more cautious with what she was doing or saying with him. So plan was, the Uber was going to drop us two off first, then take him to wherever he was going. So because of this, she asked the driver to take us to the road right before the one that lands to our house. She didn't want him to know where we lived, because now she didn't really trust him. Pete finally gets into the car. I'm on the right side, she is in the middle, and he gets in on the left. The whole time I can hear him trying to flirt with her, and saying some stuff like, "You want to hook up?" Then at one point, he was like, "She can join in too." Angie kept saying no a bunch of times to him. I was looking out the window because I didn't want to look at him. But when he said that, I gave him a weird look. But I don't think he really paid any attention to it. I looked back out my window. This is when it got a lot more creepy. He kept saying he was coming home with us, and not going back to wherever he was going. He was not letting up on coming with us. Angie told him we were walking home after a certain point because she didn't have the money to pay the whole ride. And he was like, "That's okay. I'll just follow you home. We can have a good time." So after about 10 minutes of this, she was like, "Can you just pull over?" to the driver. And he was very confused by this, probably because he never got asked this, and said, and she was like, "Please, pull over now." And so he did. Pete started to wonder why he was doing this, and asked, "What are you doing, babe?" And she was like, "I told you, you aren't coming back home with us. Get out." At this point, I was looking at him directly, and she was getting angry because he wasn't getting out of the car. So she started raising her voice, and was like, "We aren't moving until you get the heck out of this car and call yourself a different Uber." Pete started to get kind of serious now, and is like, "Why? What did I do? I'm sorry." And she just replied, "Leave now." To that, he told her that he was only leaving if she gave him her number. She refused, and then he told us he wasn't leaving the car until she did. So she said fine, and took his phone, put in some random number she thought of, and gave it back to him. He was still trying to convince her to let him stay with us, but she wasn't having it, and told him bye. He got out of the car finally, and slammed his door shut, and told the Uber to get away from where they were and take us home. I was worried, next time I went to that bar, that Pete would be there, but I haven't seen him since this situation. I always wonder what would have happened if Angie wasn't outgoing as she was, and kicked him out of the car. When I was younger, I used to do speed skating, which is a form of ice skating where you practice to become as fast as possible. I had 2 coaches. They were both pretty old. There were usually competitions at different locations where you get to compete with someone else. I had been doing ice skating for about a year at the time, and we had been traveling a lot throughout the northern parts of Norway, and we had actually traveled to Russia as well for a competition. We once traveled to a small peninsula, which is located in the middle of nowhere. This little town contains about 2,000 people, and had one single hotel. It took about 5 hours to drive to this little town from my hometown. When we finally arrived, we settled in the hotel we had booked. For some reason, they had booked 2 rooms, one for them and one for me to be alone. At the time, all the others who used to practice ice skating with me had quit, or was not able or allowed to travel so far. At first, having a hotel room for 2 for myself felt amazing. I had privacy and free time to do whatever I wanted. While I was at competitions and waiting for my turn to compete, I made friends with a girl who we will call Mary. Mary was sweet and kind, and she made the weekend I was spending in that town a little bit more fun. We were both the same age. We met later on the same day. I met her, hung out at her school, where there was an arrangement. I figured it would be a good idea to bring her to the hotel and just hang out. Honestly, it was a great idea. We watched a movie, ate some snacks, and had some fun. Then at some point in this time, for her now to leave, it was pretty late, around midnight when she left. I was a very decent kid, so I followed her downstairs to the lobby to say goodbye. I was also intending on buying a bottle of soda while I was downstairs. When she had left, I went to buy the soda at the counter that was close to the exit. There was a man standing behind the counter. He had an accent, so I figured he had moved to Norway from another country recently. He seemed very interested in me and asked what I was doing in the lobby at such a late time. I told him I wanted to get a soda and asked for the price per bottle as there was no price tag near. He told me that one bottle is 40 NOK, which is about 5 USD. I decided I would not pay that much for a small bottle of soda and said that I would be heading upstairs. The guy instantly started begging me to stay downstairs and talk to him. This scared me a little, but I felt as if I needed to stay. He asked a lot of questions. He asked what my name is, where I was from, if my parents were here, who I was with. I answered honestly to all of those, even though I felt threatened and unsafe. I knew not to trust strangers, but I've always had a thing for being nice to everyone. I eventually said I am tired and will go upstairs to catch some sleep. He tried to make me stay longer, but I decided to leave anyways. A few minutes later, before I had gone to sleep, I heard someone knocking on my door. I thought to myself that it might as well just be one of my coaches who needed something from me, so I went to open the door. It was neither of them. It was the guy from before. He was holding a lighter and in a very broken accent said that he was looking for someone who lost this lighter. I said it is not my lighter and was about to shut the door when he puts his foot between the door and the wall on my side and asks to come in. I was scared and started pushing on the door. I remember very little about this part, but I can make out what I somehow remember. To close the door and lock it, I immediately made a call to my mother, who called my coaches to tell them about the incident. I never saw this man ever again after that. When we got home, my mother made a call to the hotel manager and complained about the incident. The manager said he will not charge the guy for what he did, and that he will not face any consequences, even though my mom kept telling him what the guy's intentions likely was. I know it sounded ridiculous, but the guy probably still works there to this day. I am so confused about the whole incident, and so incredibly happy that whatever I did stopped him from getting in and going through this terrible intentions. The hotel I worked at was small. Only 53 rooms in the entire place. It's located next to downtown, in a town in central Minnesota. As a night audit, you worked by yourself with the shift being from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. You don't get many people checking into the hotel at night. 1 to 3 at most. The first duty as the night audit was to lock the doors so only guests could get in with their key. There is also a phone on the wall next to the main entrance in case someone arrives after the doors are locked, or somebody orders pizza, what have you. There is a front door in the lobby, a back door in the lobby, and 2 side doors. I proceed to lock all of the doors and head into the back room behind the front desk to do laundry. As there is no staff on hand to do laundry, another task for the night audit to finish. There is a cordless phone you can bring with you when you go into the back room, or around the other parts of the hotel. We had no more scheduled check-ins that night, but there was a couple of rooms available. I heard somebody try and open the front door, was unsuccessful, and left. Moments later, the phone rang, and when I answered, the other person did not talk right away. I walked up to the front desk, and the other person finally started talking. They went on a steeple saying there was a former cop and something about having court in the morning, and if they weren't let in, they were going to come in and shoot me, and that they were circling the hotel. There are windows that look out to the front of the hotel that is visible from the computer I had walked to during the phone call. I told them I was sorry, we didn't have any rooms available, and they hung up before I even finished my sentence. I looked out the window, and there was a person standing across the street, staring back at me with a phone in their hand. At this point, I'm really freaking out, and I go to all the doors and double check that they were all locked. It was a good thing I checked, because one of the side doors had propped open with a doorstop. Obviously, I shut the door and proceeded to go to a conference room with sight of where the person was standing. I kept the lights off and peeked through the blinds, but the person was gone. I was pretty freaked out the rest of the night, because there are windows pretty much everywhere in this hotel. So if this person was watching me, they would be able to all night if they pleased. So a person who's threatened to shoot me while I was working, let's not meet. I took a brief road trip down to a neighboring state to see Sam Smith. Before we left, I was working 10 days straight at my job and getting about 4 to 5 hours of sleep. So I was super exhausted and very easily upset over small things. The drive there was fine. Exhausting, but we made it to our hotel with plenty of time to spare. We decided to shower and get some food before leaving the hotel for the concert, and I decided we should get an Uber since the concert was in a downtown area I'd never been to before. And I also knew traffic was going to be ridiculous. And considering I'm running on fumes at this point, I decided Ubering wouldn't be a terrible idea. Our Uber driver arrives, and the ride there is pleasant. We get to the concert venue and easily find our seats. Then the show begins. I wanted to take a lot of videos on my phone, but I only managed a few, as my phone was at 10%, and I knew we would need it to contact an Uber and pay, so I turned it off. The concert ends, and after battling through the crowd to go outside, I turned my phone on to get an Uber. It's now about 11 p.m., and this was my first time. I wasn't expecting prices to jump ridiculously high, so my boyfriend suggested we take a walk around the block or so and check out downtown while we wait. I agreed, and we walk. About 30 minutes later, we stop by the entrance to a small courtyard or park about half a block away from a gas station. My boyfriend tells me to book Uber, but my phone dies before I can. Being paranoid and anxious, easily stressed woman that I am, I started to have a panic attack. Like full-on shaking, crying, can't breathe enough, or slow down my breathing, sweaty, heart-pounding panic attack. I began to overthink that we are now stranded downtown with no way home. I thought about getting a cab or a bus, but I had no cash on me, and it was getting very late. My boyfriend, bless his soul, is much more logical and rational when dealing with stressful situations, and suggests he goes to the gas station and see if he can get a charger for my phone and plug it in there. I can barely talk or walk at this point, as my body is basically just not functioning. So he helps me sit down on the bench and tells me he'll be right back and not to go anywhere. Nothing sketchy happens while he's gone, and when he comes back, he helps me to the gas station and lets me know he told the police officer in there what happened. The officer was really understanding, and he basically bought a charger for us and stood by my phone while it booted up. After taking some deep breaths, I get my phone and try to get an Uber. This is when I'm told I have no money in my debit card. Now I begin to panic some more. Here we are, alone in a more shady part of town, with bars on the windows of the gas station. At night, no money, and no way to get home. Again, my rational boyfriend reminds me I have a credit card, and after checking the balance, I book another Uber. It says he's about 5 or so minutes away, so I calm down a little bit, but not much. I tell my boyfriend I'm going to step outside to get air into my lungs, and he tells me he'll be right out. He's going to get me a water. There was a fairly long line in the gas station, and with all the people staring at me, I didn't want to be in there any longer than I had to be. So I went outside and stood by the ice machine. This is when things started to get bad. A few minutes later, a white car with its windows rolled down parks in the parking lot of the gas station. There are 2 rough-looking guys in this car. One white with what I think is brown hair and stubble, the other black with a dark blue or maybe gray or black shirt, wearing a hat, and I feel them staring at me while I try to get my breathing under control. At this point, my hands have gone numb, and I'm finding it difficult to keep my balance. I just wanted to get home. Then 2 other guys came around the corner and walk over to the car, one with dreads, wearing a wife beater and jeans, the other with a shaved head, and I think a white or maybe a light gray shirt. They talk for a little bit and exchange glances in my direction, and I hear them laughing about how screwed up and strung out I was. I guess they must have thought I was high on something, and either having a bad trip or coming down. And I don't blame them. I felt really terrible, and I'm sure I looked the part. I just tried to ignore them, and my hands weren't shaking so bad. I could check my phone to see how close the Uber was. Now he was 3 minutes away. I glanced through the bar window and see my boyfriend only a few people away from the front of the line, so I feel like everything will be fine. But I was wrong. The 2 guys were outside of the car, started catcalling me and trying to get my attention, and I continued ignoring them. Then they started coming towards me. I knew I should have moved, or said something, or done something, but I was frozen. My throat was closing up, and I felt the panic coming back. They started saying I was sexy, and asked what I was doing alone, asking where I was going, what I was on. One of them started touching my arm and getting really close, and I barely mumbled out that I wanted them to leave me alone. They just laughed it off, and said they could take me where I needed to go, and I felt them starting to pull me towards the car where the guys were waiting. I tried fighting them off, but I was so weak. I could barely walk or stand on my own. I felt like I was going to vomit. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I kept mumbling that I wanted them to let go and just leave me alone, but they didn't listen or didn't care. They just kept saying that they were all going to have fun. I felt one of them grabbing my butt and squeezing it, and we were right at the car. The smell of pot and cigarettes and alcohol filling my lungs as one of the back doors opened, and I couldn't do anything. I felt stupid. I felt like I deserved this because I couldn't fight back. I tried one last time to break free, but their hands were like claws digging into my skin. Just as I was about to be shoved in the car, I heard a familiar voice shout, "What the fuck?" along with footsteps approaching. Before I knew what was happening, the guys threw me on the ground and climbed in the car. Peeling out of the parking lot and down the street before their doors were even shut. I couldn't process it all as my boyfriend ran over to me and helped me off the ground. I just started crying. The police officer was outside too, talking into his radio about what happened and asked me if I was okay. I said I was, but I didn't know if I meant it or not. I still don't know. If they had just been a second too late, I would be in that car with them right now, going who knows where to who knows what done to me. Uber arrived not long after that, and after speaking briefly with the officer, we got in the car and went to the hotel. We got there safely, and once we were in the hotel, I stopped shaking. I couldn't sleep though, and even though I'm back home, hundreds of miles from the creeps, I can't help but be paranoid that it'll find me somehow, or somehow I'll run into them again. I don't like thinking about what could have happened to me, but I can't take my mind off stuff. I can't make it go away. I guess what I learned from this, and what I can let everyone else know, is to make sure your phone is fully charged, that you have enough money, and that you don't go anywhere alone. Even if it's just for a moment, you could still be taken in an instant.
This past Monday, my coworkers and I returned to our hotel from a day of work out in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms, and as we stood outside of our rooms, I opened mine and I saw someone in the bathroom. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was the cleaning lady in there for some reason, and then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hand. I said to my coworker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about how her key still worked and how it still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock, and she was obviously very flustered, having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse in a white plastic bag. By this time, my coworker was behind me watching all the insanity unfold. This woman was scrambling and walking towards the door, and I said, "What's in the bag?" Thinking it is probably my stuff, and so she said, No, it's just my things. It's just my things, I'll show you." And so she did. I looked, and I didn't see anything of mine, and so since I'm obviously in shock at this time, I let her leave. I went into my room, and it's been ransacked. I did a quick look around to see if anything had been taken. All of my electronics were still there. Then I went into the bathroom, and I saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there. Then I looked on the counter, and saw that she got into my medication. I'm not sure what she was going through. I'm not sure what was going through my head at that moment, other than I wanted it back. So I ran out the door to go find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out of the side of the hotel, and I didn't see her. I realized I was never going to find her, so my coworker and I went down to the lobby to tell them what happened, and then we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there was a small metal bat on my bed, a little larger than one of those novelty wooden bats that you get at a baseball game. But there's also a flashlight on the end of it. She must have left it behind in a hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaking out at this point, because I thought that she had gotten away with my medication that I need. The police got there and took our statements and looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed that was there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed out to the cops, but none of us really knew where it came from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she pried her way in somehow, but there was nothing. So we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there was no way that could be. The officer that came brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements were taken, there was nothing else they could really do as they left. I sat down to finally make some calls to tell people, and as I'm on the phone, I'm thinking about the drywall in the sink, and it still didn't make sense to me. So I'm on the phone and looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it, and then it hit me. I got my coworker and asked her to help me pull at that mirror on the wall, and when we took the mirror down, there's a hole just big enough for a desperate junkie to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again to let them know that I found this, and my boss said there's still 2 cop cars in the parking lot. So I went down to tell them, and the female cop kind of rolled her eyes, but the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked in the hole, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothing, and toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me and my room at all times. One of the officers called the original officer to come back and take pictures of this. She explained to him what's going on, and all I hear over the radio is "No freaking way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind blown as the rest of us. Obviously, we packed up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she was probably been there for a very long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I could randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed someone was smoking in their bathroom, and it was traveling through the vents. But nope, a junkie was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the walls were from a renovation, and the hotel hadn't properly patched and just covered up with mirrors. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. This all happened tonight, and I am still a bit shaken up from it, so I'm sorry if this post isn't articulated well. I work at a hotel as a front desk clerk, and I mostly work second and third shift. It's not bad, really. It's primarily a place for truckers staying the night, because it's on the warehouse district side of town, so foot traffic is very little during the day, and even less at night. I came in for my graveyard shift, which I was lucky to be doing with another coworker instead of alone like usual. My other coworker, who was clocking out, said that she had a really creepy guy come in, saying that he was praising God while watching the TV, kept asking what year it was, and was shocked that it was indeed 2019, and so on and so forth. I figured it was probably just another case of some guy high off his ass, or drunk being a nuisance. That's typical, and not really a big deal around here. About 30 minutes later, a man walks in, and sort of paces around the lobby. Very average-looking guy, wearing nice clothing with a trench coat on. He's jumping in place and looking around before he comes up to the front desk, explaining that he was here earlier and tried to get a room, but was told he couldn't use his reward points. This point of the conversation was the most lucid it would get. I explained to him that our hotel, because it's such a small location, isn't authorized to use customer reward points. He was disappointed and said he had nowhere to go, and he had to pick up his kids from school tomorrow. I apologized and asked him if he would like to pay our regular price for a room, and he just declined. My coworker went into the laundry room to get blankets for someone. Things got very uncomfortable. He said he was in high school. He read a book about hotel fires and how they started, and that he always comes prepared. Now, and gave a really weird grin about all this. I sort of awkwardly laughed it off and went back to printing out reports. He followed me on the opposite side of the desk over to the computer I was at and continued to talk to me. The conversation went something like this. "You want to know something? Ever since I modified my eyes, I can see so much more. I added thermal vision. I can see spirits now. They're everywhere. This place is absolutely crawling with them. Spirits are tied to our DNA. When we enter a place and leave our DNA, we leave parts of our spirit. That's why I brought this for you." He then placed what looked like an old box of donuts and an old pizza box on the counter in front of me and opened it, saying it was my last supper. He started to frantically reach through the jacket for something, and I was beginning to ironically panic. I placed my cell phone underneath the counter where he couldn't see, and texted my girlfriend while having my hand on the desk phone. To be honest, I had no idea what to do. He pulled out a pen and started writing on a piece of paper some weird symbols, and said they were found all over his house that was built in the 1800s. Nervously, I said, "Maybe you should move houses then." And he blankly stared for a moment, then placed a grocery bag on the counter. He said there were ashes in it that he was going to return their spirits to the earth with. At this point, my coworker came back from the laundry, and I managed to get out of the conversation. He apparently went into the parking lot, then through the back of the building again, and several people called the front desk saying they were scared of him. I called the police and told them that he was disturbing a lot of people here. My coworker told me to go home because I couldn't stop checking the parking lot for him. I feel terrible, but I've never had an encounter like that before, and I hope to God I don't ever see this guy ever again. I was staying at a Westin in Atlanta. It's not a St. Regis, but it's not a Motel 6 either. I stay at hotels a lot, and I generally think them as being safe. On the day of this event, I was terribly hungover. So hungover that I could barely get out of bed. But I had a hair appointment that I had already made a 50% deposit on, so I essentially had to pull myself together. I threw up several times before I got there. However, I eventually made it. Afterwards, I threw up on the way back. It was that bad. When I made it back to the hotel, it was between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. It wasn't even nightfall. I got to the elevator to go to my room, and it was packed with people. I was visibly sick, sweating, and trying to prevent myself from throwing up in a crowded elevator. I couldn't hold it in long enough to make it to my floor, so I got off at the first chance I got. I was on my knees, puking in a trash can by the elevator before the doors even closed. While puking, I noticed a man hovering over me. He was well dressed and about 45 to 50 years old. Out of embarrassment, I apologized for throwing up in public between heaves. He said, "I saw you on the elevator, but I didn't realize we were on the same floor." Still puking, I informed him that I wasn't on this floor. He told me that he was going to get me some help. Attempting to decline his offer, he just grabbed me by my elbow, pulled me from the ground, and started quickly dragging me down the hall. I was really out of it and didn't understand what was happening for about 15 seconds. By then, we were nearly halfway down the hall. I quickly realized that housekeeping had gone home for the day. There was no staff or patrons on the floor that I could see. I started getting really loud, and he stopped dragging me. Still, he didn't release me, so I kind of had to wiggle myself away from him. I ran back to the elevator and got on. Just before the doors closed, he put his arm in and boarded the elevator with me. I pressed the button to my floor, and he got off with me. My room was at the end of the hall. I quickly walked back to my room, got my key and opened the door, and tried to close it, only to find that his foot was blocking me from doing so. A small struggle that lasted about 8 seconds ensued. I eventually was able to close the door and put the security latch on. Then I slid to the floor and started crying. Who was this man? Why was he doing this? If he wanted to help me, then why didn't he? What was he trying to do? I don't know. But I certainly hope that we never meet again.
I grew up in Ohio, but would spend my summer breaks visiting my dad, who lived in England. This gave me the rare and fortunate opportunity to see a lot of Europe during my teenage years. In the summer of 2009, I took a trip with my father and stepmother, with one of the stops being Graz, Austria. After a day of sightseeing, we checked into our hotel, which was just outside of the city. Graz sits on the foot of the Alps, and our hotel was elevated, which gave us a nice view of the city at night, depending on your vantage point. This also made it somewhat secluded on a darker back road. The hotel was also unique in that parts of it were broken up into separate cabin-like B&Bs. My father and stepmother stayed down the street in one of those cabins, while I had my own room in the main building, which was more like your standard pub. While a lot of these details may seem unnecessary, its layout and location will come up again later. It's also important to note that my room sat over the hotel's restaurant, so the roof extended out from under my window. If I wanted to, I would have been able to step out and walk across it. We were only staying one night before moving on in our trip. It was warm, being on the second floor, so I had one of my 2 windows cracked to let in a breeze. The only English-speaking channels were CNN and MTV, so I just lay there with the lights off, the only glow coming from the TV. As I began to doze, I heard something. It sounded like gravel shifting, coming from outside. Already being a paranoid person, I turned the TV off, making my room completely black. I slowly moved towards the window, telling myself I heard a small animal or something. I crouched behind the translucent curtains and peered out. Out on the roof, maybe 20 to 30 feet away, I saw a man. He was standing upright, facing out towards the city and the back patio of the hotel. My nerves settled as I figured it's someone who had the same idea as I did. He had probably climbed out of one of the hotel rooms next to mine to get a better view of the city. No big deal. I slowly started to step away from the window when I heard the sound again. It again sounded like gravel shifting, but I could tell it wasn't coming from the man standing at a distance. It was coming from right by my window. I was lucky to have the curtains I did, as they allowed me to see out, but with my lights off, I was shielded from sight. I came back to the window and looked down and to my right. Crouching down was another man. He had a hood up and what looked like some kind of a blank white mask on. I understand now that may be just my mind exaggerating the memory, but that white, plain face is burnt into my brain. Either way, it was clear he was trying to peer into my room, but couldn't see me because I was blocked by the curtains. I stood there, staring at him for a few seconds before slowly leaning in and banging my hand on the window. He took off, as did the man at the ledge. It's clear now that the other guy was a lookout. After shutting and locking the window, I went down to the lobby and found the manager of the hotel. He barely spoke any English, so explaining what had just happened was quite hard. But once he finally understood what I was saying, he dismissed it, repeating "impossible" multiple times. I thought about going down the street to my parents' cabin, but the idea of running down a dark road after what had just happened did not sound appealing. I spent the rest of the night dozing in and out of sleep, not being able to get a full rest. The next morning, I looked over the building and the roof, trying to understand their escape plan. I still have no idea, as the only way off was to leap from the roof to the ground. But doing so would have been both disruptive and dangerous. They went in opposite directions too, which to me is quite confusing. I'm under the impression that they were just staying in another room and had simply darted back in a window, but that still doesn't explain where the second guy went. As we were leaving the hotel, a family friend who lived in Graz came to meet us for breakfast. After explaining what had happened, he nonchalantly affirmed that they had intended to rob me, while I tell myself that they were probably hoping to simply steal from a tourist while he slept. Another voice wonders how bad it actually could have gone.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.